On the glittering stages of the 1930s and 40s Hollywood, some lights shone brighter, layers darker. Behind the elegant gowns and poised smiles there were whispers of wild nights, taboo desires, and scandalous tongues that dared to mock the rules. They were beautiful, adored, and unapologetically boundary-pushing. Today you'll step behind velvet curtains and hear the secret lives of actors who refuse to play by the moral code. Meet the women and men who, when the cameras cut, revealed sides so raw, so brazen, that Hollywood nearly burned in their wake. This is not a sanitized Hollywood. This is the other side, the raunch, the ribald, the reckless passions etched into memory. They were stars of the golden age, but their backstage stories, decadent, dangerous, deliciously raunchy. Mae West, vaudeville's queen of double entendre. In 1933, filmgoers gasped as Mae West slid onto screens, torch in one hand, cigarette in the other, her voice lush, layered, and laced with double entendre. West didn't just flirt, she launched a full-frontal assault on the repression of her era. In one legendary moment, West quipped, "Is that a pistol in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" It wasn't mere flirtation, it was theatrical subversion. But beyond the witty quips, there was the woman behind the stage persona. Reportedly, she kept stacks of salacious letters, notes from admirers describing wild fantasies. Some said she acquired 3-story mansions in the Hollywood Hills to host lewd parties, according to whispered gossip. These photographs exist. Peers said the decor was bawdy, from suggestive artwork to satin ropes draping the ceilings. Mae was bold, self-promoting, and complicit in the indulgence she dared to be desired, and left behind a legacy speckled with prurient play. But her image wasn't born on film alone. Before the cameras ever caught her in soft focus, Mae West had already served time for obscenity. In 1927, her play sex was raided by police in New York City. West, the playwright and star, refused to tone it down. She spent 8 days in jail, lounging in silk pajamas, greeting guards with smirks, and using the experience to boost her notoriety. "I believe in censorship," she later said. "I made a fortune out of it." That attitude made her both irresistible and dangerous. She brought erotic autonomy to female characters and turned repression into a punchline. Studio execs hated that they needed her box office clout. She costumed herself, lavishly, selecting gowns based on how they emphasized curves. Her scripts? She wrote most of them veiling scandal in metaphor and wit. Once on the set of She Done Him Wrong, the production halted for hours, not because of technical issues, but because Mae insisted the lighting accentuate her décolletage just right. She refused to move until the cinematographer achieved what she called velvet scandal. The final shot was so suggestive it became a national controversy. Church groups protested, ticket sales soared. And Mae reveled in the contradiction. "I used to be Snow White," she joked, "but I drifted." Behind her performances were lovers, many anonymous, blacklisted entertainers, chorus boys, even prize-fighters. One famously claimed she demanded 3 rotations a night to maintain her vigor. It said that her bedroom held mirrors on the ceiling, satin restraints, and a signed portrait of herself in the nude gifted by Salvador Dalí. She was both the fantasy and the puppeteer. Mae West left behind furniture gilded and provocative. In auctions long after her death, velvet chaise lounges inscribed with her initials fetched prices as high as $50,000. Silent testaments to the scandal she built her empire upon. Busby Berkeley, choreography as control. Imagine a fantasy world of kaleidoscopic dancers swirling in frenzied patterns. That was Busby Berkeley's playground. But his women, they were not dancers. They were demigods of desire. Hollywood lore says Berkeley's Gold Diggers productions revolved around his bold vision, and an even bolder behind-the-scenes code. He ran boot camps where dancers would disrobe on cue, practicing suggestive routines under his direction. No topless scenes ever reached the studio, but Berkeley orchestrated an entire ballet of cheekiness. These women, faceless in filmed frames, carried trauma, freedom, shame, desire. Berkeley's Suppression-era studio regime was a paradox. Artistry, yes, but powered by a culture of male dominance and sexual provocation. At night, those unspoken truths echoed in whispers backstage. He was relentless. Dancers were expected to rehearse for 12-hour stretches, often barefoot on cold cement. Some fainted, some quit. The ones who stayed, young, desperate, and unseen, were promised only one thing: beauty on screen. Off-screen, Berkeley's behavior darkened. He drank, he flirted, he isolated favorite dancers for choreographic consultations that sometimes lasted hours behind locked doors. In one forgotten 1936 anecdote, Berkeley was said to have thrown a gold-plated hairbrush across the rehearsal hall at a dancer who missed a cue. The brush struck her cheek. She was not offered medical care, only more rouge. Another dancer in a Lifetime retrospective published in the 80s whispered, "He'd tell us to slip off our panties and pretend to be flowers. He shot us from strange angles, whispering, 'Show me petals, petals, petals.' It was art," they said, but it felt like they were stealing our souls. The cruelty-masked chaos, Berkeley's mind, brilliant and fractured, drew patterns of eroticism and control. He demanded high angles, geometric perfection, feminine submission, and while his films became Depression-era escapism, behind the camera he was conducting flesh. What remains today? Studio stills of his grandest numbers, rows of legs, spiral patterns, symmetry, but not the faces that came undone. Rita Hayworth, whitened, winded, wondered. Rita Hayworth, the ultimate femme fatale. Lissa Hayworth in private, but Rita, she drank whiskey mocha in the morning and harbored a sexuality that clawed its way in every role. She began at Columbia Pictures as the quiet wife of the studio boss, though behind closed doors she was rebellious, raucous, even rumored to have thrown chairs at desk men under the influence. Stories survive of after-hours trysts with studio alumni, actors, musicians, even mob figures. Rita didn't just perform sexual magnetism, she lived it. She once complained to close friends, "I'm not allowed to be who I am." Rita was born Margarita Carmen Cancino, and she was whitened by Columbia. Her hairline raised by electrolysis, her name anglicized, her accent softened. The studio's ruthless head Harry Cohn reportedly bugged her dressing room, tracked her dates, and ordered studio men to keep her busy but clean. When she briefly disappeared to Palm Springs with Orson Welles' Cohn sent men to retrieve her, she came back exhausted. Her private world was tumult. She married 5 times to escape confinement, each ending in bitterness. One husband, director Orson Welles, reportedly called her a delicate weapon wrapped in silk and stained with tears. Her long exile from Hollywood after Gilda was spent chasing the reinvention offered by Europe. Hubcaps in rain-slicked streets, smoky cafes, letters in French she never sent. Yet, as fans adored Gilda, the woman behind the mirror was doing more than smoking cigarettes suggestively. Off-camera, she was drinking martinis at 10 a.m. in lingerie, reciting bawdy poetry with jazz musicians in smoky lounge rooms. It was liberation, but it landed her with broken marriages and a public facade that barely contained the truth. In the end, Alzheimer's stole Rita from the world. For her daughter, it stole a mother. For the world, it diminished one of its most luminous icons. She died confused, the sex goddess reduced to a whisper, with unmailed letters still locked in desks. Clifton Webb, the Virgin Queen's reign. The man was Valentino-esque in appearance, with the flair of a Broadway renegade and the soul of a showgirl. Gene Kelly might have been the darling of musical cinema, but it was his rival, openly flamboyant and rumored bisexual star Clifton Webb, who stirred the backlot gossip into a stew of speculation. Webb lived with his mother well into his 70s, an arrangement considered both quaint and bizarre, but insiders whispered that their Beverly Hills mansion hosted nighttime salons filled with suggestive innuendo, champagne fountains, and cloaked male companions. Webb wore silk robes on terraces, recited risqué Wildeen verse by moonlight, and, according to close acquaintances, refused to deny his private desires. He was never seen in the arms of women off-camera despite playing debonair bachelors on screen. In private, he lounged on velvet divans with young protégés, discussed physique culture, and once startled a gossip columnist by referring to himself, half in jest, as the Virgin Queen of Sunset Boulevard. Hollywood's secret queer subculture had many members. Webb didn't speak of it, but he didn't hide it either. He held salon evenings where artists, dancers, and young poets were invited like honored guests. There, they read erotic prose, recited Sappho in Greek, drank elderflower liqueur from china cups, and sketched nudes in candlelight. One artist recalled, he had a velvet couch covered in rose petals, and he'd say, "Show me truth, not talent." In an era when whispers could end careers, Webb danced the edge, figuratively and literally, until his roles dried up and he faded into private opulence. When he passed, his estate was filled with Egyptian art, male nude statues, and handwritten erotica rumored to be inspired by his own affairs. The world only ever saw his bow tie, his Polish, his cleverness. What they missed was the man who dared to live his truth, cloaked in velvet rebellion. Tallulah Bankhead, mayhem in feathers. And then there was Tallulah. Tula Bankhead didn't seduce the world quietly, she stormed it. When she wasn't stealing scenes, she was stealing husbands, wives, hotel keys, and, on more than one occasion, liquor carts. Her voice was husky with bourbon and mischief. Her eyes sparkled like a woman who knew the rules, so she could break them more poetically. She once sauntered into a Vanity Fair party topless, under a feathered cape, shouting to startled producers, "I'm the only damn thing worth filming in this town." When asked once why she never married, she famously growled, "I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy." It wasn't bravado, it was her gospel. Bankhead's liaisons weren't whispered about. They were broadcast. Affairs with actors, writers, even foreign royalty were fair game. She bragged of sleeping with men and women alike, calling herself ambidextrous when pressed. Behind her hotel room's locked door, she was known to host orgies with the cast and then some, as she once told an interviewer, just to avoid a dull rap party. But behind the spectacle was loneliness. In later years, she often drank herself into stupors, shouting old lines to empty rooms. Her wit stayed sharp, her fame didn't, and yet to the end she clung to her theatrical grandeur. When she died, her will reportedly included a clause asking for her ashes to be scattered somewhere scandalous. Hollywood forgot Tallulah, but the walls of every 1930s dressing room remember her. Errol Flynn, a swashbuckling legend. Then came Errol Flynn, the name alone enough to send studio heads into a sweat. For a time he was the ultimate matinee idol. All jawlines and swordplay. But behind the scenes, Flynn's life was a cinematic orgy of drink, vice, and allegations. Studio executives tried their best to contain his appetites. They failed. Women, and more than a few men, were said to emerge from his Malibu beach house in various states of dishevelment and awe. His yacht, the infamous Zaka, hosted parties so debauched that even Hemingway reportedly fled mid-soiree. Flynn stocked its lower decks with liquor, opium, and some claimed photography equipment, not for picture reels but for memories. He wasn't just a playboy. He reveled in scandal. When charged with statutory rape in 1942, his defense was not one of innocence, but charisma. He turned the courtroom into a theater and emerged, acquitted, but forever tainted. Flynn also served briefly in World War II naval intelligence in the Caribbean. He wrote at length in secret journals about guilt over giving orders that led to death. These journals were kept private, until modern filmmakers pieced them together and published excerpts. He was not just reckless, but haunted. Privately, Flynn journaled of his darkest impulses, his regrets, his hungers. "I like my whiskey old and my women young," he wrote, And though the world gasped, they also returned, again and again, to see that same glint in his eye on screen. He lived fast, aged badly, and died with more stories than truths. Among the objects left behind, a black silk robe, dozens of suggestive letters, and a silver cigarette case engraved with "In like Flynn," the phrase that became both a joke and a cautionary tale. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, power and scandal. Crawford kept 2 dressing rooms, one for rest, the other for personal appointments. She preferred to be massaged in silence by male assistants while sipping brandy and smoking cigars. She dressed in pearls at midnight. One assistant said Joan insisted on a stencil of a roaring lion in her bedroom. Her symbol, she said, was not a woman, but a sovereign. Her rise from orphan to queen was brutal. She changed her name at 16, lied about her age, and manipulated the Hollywood system, sometimes by bedsides, sometimes by boardrooms. Her adopted daughter Christina's incendiary memoirs, published after Joan's death, told of a regime of physical discipline, emotional surveillance, and nightly drinking contests that ended with Crawford declaring, "I'll show them what a star can do." Clark Gable, Hollywood's king, left behind more than his on-screen swagger. He once cornered Carole Lombard at a party and whispered, "I'm not wearing underwear, let's fix that." She slapped him, then laughed, and later married him. Gable fathered multiple children outside his public marriage, sending hush money and keeping him more tethered to scandal than any studio wanted. Their stories overlapped in nightclub corners, in champagne haze, in drug-fueled dawn. Both feared mortality. Both feared shame. Crawford died alone. Gable died of a heart attack on a ranch, still calling for Lombard's name. The Fixer, Eddie Mannix and the Machinery of Silence. Hollywood may have sparkled on the surface, but beneath its polished gloss lay a machine that scrubbed, sanitized, and when necessary, silenced. For every scandal that reached the headlines, there were a dozen more swept quietly under studio carpets by the hands of one man, Eddie Mannix. As an MGM executive and fixer, Mannix operated from the shadows. He knew where the bodies were buried, sometimes literally. His job was to protect the stars, the brands, and the image, and if that meant bribing reporters, paying off pregnancies, hiding affairs, or roughing up troublesome lovers, so be it. He had the blessing of Louis B. Mayer and the fear of every actor on payroll. Mannix was more than a protector. He was an orchestrator. He arranged vision screenings before headlines. He bribed columnists to kill stories. He paid off actors so they'd fly home quietly. He had blackmail on speed dial. He also controlled Judy Garland's medication routine. Amphetamines by morning, barbiturates by night. She called it her prison. Some say he taped her performances, then doctored real edits to show her best, but the pills remained. Ted Healy, the Three Stooges' lost founder, died after a beating. Allegedly by MGM actors, the coroner cited natural causes. Mannix's phone was humming. Charges never came. Director George Cukor was fired from Gone with the Wind under mysterious circumstances, officially for temperament, unofficially for deviation. Hollywood didn't discuss that word. Even Howard Hughes, with his obsession over Jane Russell's measurements, and Katharine Hepburn's suitors paid the same fixers. Money bought obedience. Madonna of Mechanics could clean gold for Hughes, but he was still racked by secrets. By the late 1950s, the old codes crumbled, television rose. The studio system weakened. Investigative journalism gained traction. Artists began telling their own stories. Gloria Graham, once a darling of noir cinema, lost her career not for her sultry performances, but for marrying her former stepson. Scandalous, yes, but also revealing. By then, audiences wanted more than glamour. They wanted vulnerability, truth, even if it came wrapped in controversy. The fall of silver, final years, and legacies. As these legends aged, so did their masks. Rita Hayworth developed Alzheimer's. Memories collapsed. She died confused, the sex goddess reduced to a whisper. Her last sighting, in a wheelchair, rereading her script of Gilda quivering lips, mouthing words from a life that vanished. Errol Flynn died in the arms of a young girlfriend, bloated and broken at 50. His ship had sunk long before he walked on it. Mae West lived until her 80s, but in solitude. Rhinestones, wit, and a great lawn filled with her statues. Friends had died. Songs gone. She died with a note. Glad I did it all. What's next? Tallulah Bankhead died in a hospital bed clutching a pack of cigarettes. Her last words, reportedly, codeine, bourbon. She was buried in red satin. Clifton Webb, alone. A mother's shrine, his final audience. Joan Crawford died alone. Her funeral sparsely attended. Her legacy, a Frankenstein built of gossip, fame, and rumored violence. A sovereign dethroned. Clark Gable died calling Carol's name, and his last wish was to be buried at sea where he might find her once more. Judy Garland, buried on her daughter's lap, pills, hush money in her system. Her final song left unsung. Gloria Graham died of cancer. She was interviewed in her last years. I never regret the choices. I just regret the silence they forced. Curtains down, echoes remain. But make no mistake, these stars were not victims. They lived larger than life because they knew life was fleeting. They clawed at freedom in a world built to cage them, and though they shocked, offended, even frightened middle America, they also liberated it. They weren't the morality tales Hollywood wished them to be. They were messy, brilliant, raunchy humans who played gods by day and burned like devils by night. Their estates, long auctioned off, tell fragments of the truth. Mae West's furniture gilded and provocative. Errol Flynn's yacht restored, but eerily silent. Rita's letters, some still sealed. They left behind more than movies. They left echoes. And we remember not because they were saints, but because they weren't, because they dared, because they burned, because behind every silver screen was a star that refused to fade quietly. As the projector dims and the velvet curtains fall, remember these living legends, not as pictures, but as passions. Scandals didn't destroy them, silence almost did. But we are here. The stories remain, and in the hush of old theaters their secrets still breathe.